Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been an emergency medical technician for nearly 8 years now. Started right after college when I realized my pre-med degree wasn't getting me into medical school right away. Figured I'd get some real-world experience while I kept applying. 8 years later, I'm still here, partly because I fell in love with the work and partly because the adrenaline rush becomes addictive. You get used to a lot of things in this job. Blood, screaming, death, but entitled people. Those I'll never get used to. Last month, during one of the worst storms our county had seen in decades, we got called to a massive pileup on Highway 40. Rain was coming down so hard, you could barely see 10 feet ahead. My partner and I were first on the scene with 3 more ambulances right behind us. The dispatcher had said at least 6 vehicles were involved, with several injuries reported. When we pulled up, I could see it was even worse than that. Cars were scattered across all lanes, some flipped completely, others crumpled like aluminum cans. We did a quick triage assessment, checking each vehicle for victims. That's when I first encountered her. The woman in the white SUV crushed between a semi and a minivan. Her vehicle was totaled. The driver's side completely caved in, windows shattered. Blood was streaming down her face from a deep gash on her forehead, and her left arm was bent at an unnatural angle. Classic compound fracture. I identified myself as an emergency medical services worker and asked for her name. She surprised me with her response, insisting that she was fine and telling me not to touch her. Her attitude caught me off guard, especially given her obvious injuries. I explained to her that she was bleeding heavily and her arm was badly injured. I tried to convince her that we needed to get her stabilized and transported to a hospital. She again refused, more forcefully this time, claiming that she was perfectly fine. She then pointed to a crystal pendant she was wearing, explaining that it was already aligning her chakras and stopping her internal bleeding. I tried to use a bit of humor, acknowledging her belief in the crystal but pointing out that while her chakras might be aligned, her arm definitely wasn't. I explained we needed to extract her from the vehicle before it became unstable. She grew more agitated and accused us of having ulterior motives. She suggested we were actually government agents who wanted to harvest her organs. Her paranoia was escalating rapidly. By this point, my partner had arrived with the extraction equipment. He urged that we needed to move quickly because the vehicle's structure wasn't stable. The worsening rain added to the urgency. I made one final attempt to reason with her, explaining that there were other injured people who needed our help. I pleaded with her to let us do our job and get her safely out of the crushed SUV. She refused again, more vehemently this time, declaring that she wouldn't go anywhere with what she called organ harvesters, and insisted she knew her rights. We had no choice but to proceed with the extraction. As my partner began working on the door, I reached in to place a neck brace on her as a precaution. That's when she completely lost it. She grabbed the fire extinguisher from the floor of her passenger seat and started spraying it wildly. The foam hit me directly in the face, temporarily blinding me. I stumbled backwards, slipping on the wet pavement. She continued screaming as she sprayed, yelling for help and repeating her accusations about us trying to take her organs. By this point, the highway patrol had arrived. Through my burning eyes, I could see one of the officers approaching. Behind him, another ambulance was pulling up. The driver couldn't see well through the downpour and the extinguisher foam now clouding the air. I tried to shout a warning, but it was too late. The ambulance skidded on the wet road and slammed into the back of the SUV, pushing it further into the semi. The impact sent me flying backward. When I came to, I was on a stretcher, my partner looking down at me with concern. My partner asked if I was okay and explained that the woman had caused me to get a concussion when I fell. I asked what had happened to her, and he told me that the police had taken her into custody. He explained that she was being treated at county hospital but was under arrest for reckless endangerment, having injured 3 emergency workers with her actions. 2 weeks later, I was back on duty, though still dealing with some vision issues from the extinguisher chemicals. We got word that the woman who everyone at the station now called Crystal Karen, had been diagnosed with untreated bipolar disorder. Apparently, she'd stopped taking her medication months ago. I felt bad for her mental health situation, but not for what happened next. Her insurance company denied her claim because her actions constituted willful endangerment, leaving her with hundreds of thousands in medical and liability bills. I attended the court appearing along with the other injured EMTs. The judge allowed statements from all victims, including the family of 2 children who had been trapped in one of the other cars. Children we managed to save despite being down 3 EMTs due to her actions. The father of those children stood up in court and addressed her directly. He told her that while she was fighting the people who were trying to help her, these same EMTs had saved his children's lives. He described how he had pulled his 6-year-old daughter and 4-year-old son from their crushed car, even though one of us could barely see because of what she did. He emphasized that we weren't after her organs. We were simply doing our job, which was saving lives. I'll never forget the look on her face when she realized what her actions had nearly cost. The judge sentenced her to 2 years probation and mandatory psychiatric treatment, plus community service at the local hospital. She's working to pay off her debts and is on proper medication now. She even sent an apology letter to our station. I've kept it pinned to our bulletin board as a reminder that sometimes the most entitled people are fighting battles we can't see. Doesn't excuse their behavior, but it helps explain it. Still, in our line of work, explanations don't help much when you're trying to save lives in a rainstorm while someone's spraying fire extinguisher foam in your face. I've been working as an emergency medical technician for about 5 years now. I originally got into this line of work after my grandfather had a heart attack, and the quick response of the emergency medical team saved his life. That day changed everything for me. I quit my boring office job, enrolled in EMT training, and never looked back. Most days on the job are pretty routine: car accidents, elderly falls, the occasional overdose. But there are some calls that stick with you. This is one of those stories. It was a busy Saturday afternoon at the local shopping mall. My partner and I had just finished lunch when we got the call about a man having a seizure near the food court. We grabbed our equipment and rushed over. When we arrived, I could see a small crowd gathered around a middle-aged man on the floor. He was actively seizing, his body rigid, limbs jerking uncontrollably. A woman who I assumed was his wife was kneeling beside him, looking panicked. When we approached with our medical bags, the woman suddenly stood up and blocked our path. I politely addressed her as ma'am and explained that we were emergency medical technicians who needed to help her husband. She forcefully refused our help, telling us to stay away from him. I was confused but tried to remain calm. This wasn't an unusual reaction. People in crisis sometimes lash out. I tried again, explaining to her that her husband was having a seizure and needed immediate help, asking her to please step aside. She became more aggressive, stating that she didn't believe in our fancy equipment and thought our beeping machines would only make things worse. By this point, my partner had called for police backup, sensing the situation was escalating beyond a normal medical call. The man on the floor had stopped seizing but was now unconscious, which was concerning. I attempted to reassure her that we weren't going to use any machines right then. We just needed to check his vitals and ensure he was breathing properly. She accused us of thinking we knew better than nature and declared that if it was his time to go, then he should be allowed to die rather than be touched by filthy people like us with our chemicals and poisons. She was becoming increasingly agitated, pacing back and forth between us and her husband. The crowd around us had grown with concerned shoppers, watching the scene unfold. I pleaded with her, emphasizing that we were only trying to help and that her husband could die without medical attention. That's when everything went completely sideways. Without warning, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small canister. She shouted at us to stay back. Before I could react, she started spraying pepper spray directly at my face and my partner's. The burning was immediate and excruciating. I stumbled backward, my eyes feeling like they were on fire, barely able to breathe. The crowd scattered in panic. I could hear people screaming, coughing. Through my burning eyes, I saw my partner on his knees, also affected by the spray. Somehow, I managed to grab my radio. Between coughs, I told dispatch that we had an emergency involving an assault on EMTs and requested immediate police assistance, noting that the patient was still down. Just as I was trying to wipe my eyes with my shirt, I heard the sounds of running footsteps. The mall security had arrived, followed closely by police officers who had already been on their way. The police officer commanded her to drop the spray and put her hands where they could see them. The woman yelled back that they couldn't tell her what to do and accused us of trying to kill her husband, insisting she had rights. I couldn't see clearly, but I could hear the commotion as the officers restrained her. As she was being handcuffed, she continued screaming, demanding they get their hands off her and asking if they knew who she was. She threatened to sue everyone and insisted her husband didn't need what she called poison medicine. As she was being led away, still screaming threats and obscenities, a second EMT team that had been called as backup arrived and immediately began attending to both the unconscious man and us. One of the backup EMTs helped flush my eyes with saline solution, while others put the man on a stretcher. Despite the woman's resistance, they were able to stabilize him and rush him to the hospital. From what I heard later, he had suffered a grand mal seizure due to undiagnosed epilepsy, but survived thanks to the quick medical intervention. My partner and I were treated for chemical irritation to our eyes and respiratory tracts. Thankfully, there was no permanent damage, though it took several days for the burning sensation to completely subside. As for the woman, she was charged with assault on emergency medical personnel, resisting arrest, and reckless endangerment. She was facing serious jail time, especially since her actions had not only endangered us, but also significantly delayed critical medical care for her husband. When her husband recovered and was interviewed by police, he revealed that he had been begging her for months to let him see a doctor about his recurring headaches and dizzy spells. She had refused, insisting that modern medicine was a conspiracy and that herbs and essential oils were all he needed. 3 months ago, my life changed forever at what was supposed to be a fun summer park festival. I've been diabetic since I was 14. For 10 years, I've managed it pretty well with insulin and careful monitoring. My endocrinologist always praised me for how diligently I tracked my numbers and adjusted my insulin. Living with type 1 diabetes isn't easy, but I'd made it part of my routine. I never let it define me or limit what I could do. I met my girlfriend at a farmer's market 2 years ago. I was buying some vegetables when she approached me, gushing about the benefits of organic produce and offering me a sample of her homemade kombucha. She was beautiful, confident, and passionate. She ran a wellness blog with about 50,000 followers and was always going on about natural remedies and clean eating. At first, I thought her passion was admirable, even if I didn't agree with everything she said. She had this way of making people believe in her vision of health, a world where doctors were unnecessary and nature provided all the medicine we needed. She never liked my dependence on insulin. She constantly sent me articles about the dangers of pharmaceuticals and how bitter melon juice or cinnamon could reverse diabetes. I'd explain that type 1 diabetes doesn't work that way, but she'd just smile and say, I'd been brainwashed by Big Pharma. I should have seen the red flags, but I figured her heart was in the right place. The day of the park festival was scorching hot, easily over 95 degrees. The city had organized this big summer celebration with food vendors, local bands, and artisan booths spread throughout the central park. We walked around for hours, sampling different foods and listening to music. I've been careful about my insulin dosage that morning, but between the heat and all the walking, I started feeling off. That familiar, light-headed sensation that sends alarm bells ringing for any diabetic. I discreetly checked my blood sugar. It was dropping fast, already down to 55 and falling. My hands started trembling as I told her I needed to sit down and take some glucose tablets. I weakly explained to her that my blood sugar was crashing and I needed to sit down right away. She dismissed my concerns, suggesting I was probably just dehydrated and should drink some of her special lemon water instead. I insisted that I needed glucose immediately and that the situation was serious. I remember reaching for my emergency kit, but everything went fuzzy. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the hospital 3 days later. From what the police and my sister told me, I collapsed into a diabetic coma. A festival goer who was a nurse recognized what was happening and called emergency medical technicians. That's when things got truly horrific. As the EMTs tried to treat me, my girlfriend physically blocked them. She stood over my unconscious body, screaming about how insulin was poison. She yelled at the EMTs not to dare inject me with what she called poison, claiming I didn't need their chemicals. The EMT explained to her that I was in a diabetic coma and needed insulin immediately or I could die. She stubbornly insisted she had natural medicine that would help me, demanding they give her space to give me bitter melon juice. The EMTs tried to reason with her, explaining that I would literally die without proper medical intervention. That's when she pulled out a pocket knife. She threatened the medical team, saying she was protecting me from their chemicals and ordering them to back off. The EMT pleaded with her to put the knife down so they could help me. She escalated her threats, warning that if they tried to touch me with a needle, she would stop them. A crowd gathered as a standoff ensued. Thankfully, someone had called the police, who arrived quickly. When she refused to drop the knife, they had to use a taser on her. I was finally rushed to the hospital, but by then, I'd been in a diabetic coma far too long. The doctors later told me that the delay in treatment caused severe complications, including permanent kidney damage. I'll need dialysis for the rest of my life unless I can get a transplant. My sister showed me the news reports while I was recovering. My girlfriend was charged with aggravated assault and obstruction of emergency services. At her trial, the judge was ruthless. The judge sternly told her that her dangerous pseudoscientific beliefs nearly cost a man his life and ordered her to pay all medical expenses related to the incident. She tried to defend herself, claiming she was just trying to protect me and that they didn't understand. The judge cut her off, stating that what he understood was that she had threatened medical professionals with a knife while they attempted to save someone's life. The aftermath was bizarre. Her wellness blog followers initially rallied behind her, claiming she was being persecuted by the medical establishment. But when my family filed a civil lawsuit for negligence and my full medical records became public, showing the extent of damage her actions had caused, most of her supporters abandoned her. Her wellness empire crumbled overnight. Sponsors dropped her, and her website became a ghost town. The comment section filled with people who felt betrayed by her dangerous advice. One former follower posted a scathing comment expressing how they had trusted her for health guidance, but she had almost killed someone. They questioned how she could claim to help people when she denied established medical science. The final chapter of this story came 3 years later. My sister called to tell me something she'd seen online. My ex-girlfriend had developed type 2 diabetes herself. In a twisted display of commitment to her beliefs, she refused insulin treatment, instead trying to treat herself with the same natural remedies she'd pushed on others. Her health deteriorated rapidly. She died alone in her apartment, her body found only after neighbors complained about the smell. Her final blog post, written days before she died, was just 4 words. They were right. I don't feel any satisfaction in how things turned out. There is no victory in watching someone destroy themselves with their own stubbornness. Sometimes at night, I still wonder if I could have done more to help her see reason. Maybe if I'd been more forceful in explaining my condition, or if I'd insisted she come to doctor's appointments with me, things might have ended differently. But then I remember how she looked at the festival, standing over my unconscious body with a knife, willing to threaten innocent people trying to save my life, all because she couldn't accept being wrong. Her family reached out to me after her death. They apologized for what she'd done, explaining that her obsession with wellness and natural remedies had started after her mother died of cancer years ago despite aggressive medical treatment. It didn't excuse what she did, but it helped me understand a little better. I just wish she could have seen past her entitlement and beliefs before they cost us both so dearly. I still have the scars, physical and emotional, from that day at the park festival. Every dialysis session is a reminder of how dangerous entitlement and pseudoscience can be. If there's any lesson in all this, it's that sometimes the most entitled people are those who believe their opinions matter more than other people's lives. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.